Now, in a personal story, when I finished my PhD in Hawaii, I was working with the justice system for 10 years. And when I finished, I thought I'd get a job. But, the minute you finish your PhD, no one wants you. And so I spent 1.5 years in unemployment. And for me, it was really one of the happiest times in my life. And I just went to the beach every day. I swam, and I wrote a book, and I just spent time with friends. And to me, it was kind of, okay, here's a crisis. What do? I make things work for me. But systemically, what allowed it? So it's not just the personal success story. Systemically, there was a community of resilience. I had many friends in Hawaii who said, no problem, no problem. You're out of a job. Sometimes we're out of a job. We'll make it work. So there was a structure of community behind that which allowed the new age thinking to actually work. Now, I did have one friend who was always scared to death, and she said, Sohail, how are you surviving? How are you surviving? And she was always panicking me that I started to panic. I said, no, Pat, everything's okay. The beach is wonderful. I can write, things will work out. So it turned out I met someone from Brisbane in a sauna in Finland. And he said, you should move to Queensland. So there's two lessons. There's the inner part here, whatever your worldview, but I also think there's a structural edge, meaning communities of resilience. In the US, we didn't have Medicare, so I remember that year I did get sick for 3 weeks and couldn't afford to go to a doctor. Where, of course, when you have social systems that support, then the creative destruction part, innovation is possible because people feel supported. This leads to even the broader story, which is symptoms of capitalism. That the real issue is not God's plan or the inner story or the mortgage crisis or banking too much lending, banks won't lend to each other. The real story is that you get bad societies when you have too much inequity. So this is, in fact, the last phases of world capitalism. We've had world capitalism for 500 years. All systems die. We're in the final era of basically the end of world capitalism. We know something is wrong when we've saw in the Roman Empire, other empires, when core productivity goes to the wrong places. 1 to 3 trillion was spent on the Iraq War. Between 25 to 50% of the world's scientists work with the military. And even I'm working with Interpol and the police. They say our biggest concern is that all the money goes to militarize the police when we know community policing works. So there's something wrong when the entire system goes that way. You get basically a collapse at every level. Whether it's Marx, this is amazing. When Time magazine had a picture of Marx saying, let's look at the Marxist critique of capitalism. I never thought I'd see that in Time magazine. So whether it's Marx or my own teacher, P.R. Sarkar, with his alternative theory of economics, basically people are saying something's wrong with world capitalism and there's many solutions. Let the beast die. Something else has to happen. At the inner level, the story is what all kids say. Dad, it's not fair. Right? Pretty much that's it. Whether you're Marxist, Trotskyite, Leninite, wherever you are, the story is the system is not fair. How do we make it fair? The systemic change is to move money from the military complex to productive social areas. Now the last story, and then I'll go to the scenarios, is the eco-spiritual social one. That in fact, as our colleague said, this is a window of opportunity. Don't see this just as a crisis. In fact, the other 5 stories are correct. There was lending to the wrong people. Yes, banks didn't have enough regulation. Yes, greed was too much. Yes, there's a shift to Asia. Yes, world capitalism is a problem. But don't forget, capitalism does bring innovation, although it doesn't provide the social support. And then I got a book from a pamphlet from Morgan Stanley. And they were very clear. It's not just about capitalism, but if you look at the companies that are being punished, it's those that aren't green. So if you look at the car companies, those that are doing green technology, energy savings, they're not being punished as much. So it's not just social and spiritual, it's also who's being more sustainable. Hazel Henderson at the systemic level says we have speculation needs to be reduced or taxed. $3 trillion of daily currency goes around the world. Why can't we tax it just for less than 1% and use that money for the global millennial funds? James Robertson, who's kind of a leftist green thinker, he said, this is the time for new economic currency. The problem is the U.S. can export its debt because we all use US dollars. So now James Robertson says that 3 months ago we need a new world currency. Suddenly China says that yesterday. That's a dramatic in just three months. A crazy idea to now saying, oh my God, is this time for a new currency? The eco-spiritual sustainable is we need dramatic shifts, move from the corporatist model to a cooperative model. We don't want to lose the incentive system though. You still have to have some ways for people to be encouraged. Finally, at the systemic level, there has to be a different way to measure things. Again, the Greens have been saying this for years. It can't just be profit, prosperity. In this story, it's social inclusion, it's also sustainability, and I think if you take this further, it's also some level of a happiness index or a spirituality index. So the metaphor in this is the great transition. We've had 500 years or even 5,000 years of one system, we're moving to something else. So you can see the global crisis as a narrow issue, mortgage, banking, finance, West, capitalism, or even in terms of our entire worldview, how we've constructed reality. I don't think any one of those are totally wrong or right. I think it's how deep you want to go, how broad you want to go. So when I look at the literature, those are the 7 maps that keep on coming across, and which one you believe helps define what the solution will be. I think most political leaders, they will take the narrow view, let's just spend more, right? If you spend more, everything will be okay. If you go deeper, that just reinforces the problem that we had a few years ago. So for China, India, I don't think we should stop their consumption. I don't believe in that at all. I've seen the poverty there, but how do we transform the consumption into products that are more green, more sustainable, more socially inclusive, more gender partnership? How do we transform the consumption into the type of future we want? So that's taking the crisis, having some hard-edge systemic rules, but still telling a new story. Let me now push it further. What then are the alternative futures? I had my analytic hat on for the last 30 minutes. Here's the analysis. What then is possible? So these are 5 different futures. And the first one is what I think most people, well, by your comments, may reject, is business as usual, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Really, we don't change. It's a pendulum. Growth versus equity, left versus right, globalism versus localism. We had Reagan, now we have Obama. After 10 years, we'll go back to the Reagan archetype. So it just goes back and forth. Protect people, social inclusion, that works for a while. We either get it wrong, then it goes back to incentives, let's move forward. So this is the creative minority, Obama, etc., solves the problem. Keynesian economics solves it. We have 10, 15 years of infrastructure, boom times, things go very well. Of course, what we'll do about, and then, of course, what happens? Innovation gets stifled, inflation comes back, and then we're back to the old problem. So this is kind of the pendulum. So it's left versus right. They're both different parts of the same story. And by 2020, 2030, the West will have gone down. But Hegel's Geist, or spirit, moves elsewhere, and it will probably move, as we said earlier, to the Pacific. So you have a systemic geopolitical shift, and that scenario 2 is the rise of Chindia and the eventual creation of an Asian Union. Again, the reasons I gave earlier, demographic dividends, $2 trillion in external reserves, savings rate, and China, India, they don't have the American story about inequity. What's great about U.S. is anyone can make it, inequity leads to progress. China and India have a strong, more collectivist view. We need to protect those at the bottom. Again, when I was quoting Brazil, same type of worldview, they asked Lula, why does he have the highest popularity rate of any prime minister in the world? He said, because we've done both. We've had innovation, and we've actually tried to protect the poor and bring electricity, etc. So Goldman Sachs now predicts that the BRICS, they'll go ahead of the G7 economies by 2027. So the economic reasoning is there, the demographic reasoning is there, the worldview reasoning is there, and I would say by 2050, if you take these deep Sorokin shifts, where once you push one way too much, the entire system shifts. So I would say you'll get a Chindia, but essentially the Dalai Lama will have the last laugh. So I see China, India very much around the Falun Dafa, Tibetan Buddhist, very much religious, spiritual countries by 2050. And I base that thinking is what you hate, you become. Why would the entire security apparatus be trying to fight this guy who's a very sweet guy, etc., etc.? So why do you hate something so much? Eventually, I say it over and over, you become what you hate. So the forecast is in scenario 2, rise of Chindia, eventually becoming a religious spiritual center, perhaps like the Holy Roman Empire. That's scenario 2. Scenario 3 is Ian's, that this crisis can't be solved without remembering that we're on one planet. Climate change, global governance, war against terrorism, they're all there. The only way forward is the dramatic shift to global sustainability. So it's new technology, green technologies, new carbon trading regimes, and even an idea that came up in Brisbane was, can you develop the personal carbon credit trading card? So we have our normal credit card, part of the real financial economy, but you have a carbon credit card, part of the earth economy. So you have person-to-person trading. Now, whether that can work or not, we can debate, but it starts to make nature far more real and starts to create a new type of economic system. So the first phase will be shallow, things like turn off the water in your shower, et cetera, but over time, you get the real tough stuff in terms of energy regimes, in terms of where governments really put their investments. We know oil is subsidized by most nations. What if you subsidize solar? What if you subsidized wind? So you have a really strong shift, which also creates real winners or losers. So in scenario 3, you have the shallow phase 1, but over time, you really have world sustainability, and that takes about 20, 30, 40 years to emerge. Now, the weakness with that argument is most of us don't like pain. And so the joy of greed sometimes takes over the delayed gratification of saving the planet. I mean, I know personally when I was walking here, I saw the AC in the gym in the hotel on. And I thought, I should turn it off. I thought, but then I'll be late for the lecture. And suddenly I had to make that decision. And actually, I chose to come here on time. And now that I'm speaking, I said, oh God, I messed up. So if you want to find the problem, it's here, meaning all of us. So in that sense, it's systemic change, but also changing our story. Now, in the US, what in fact is doing well? And this gives us a hint. Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, he had, what are the 3 economies that are now skyrocketing? He said, 1 is gun purchasing. That's going up dramatically. 2, it's alcohol. 3, it's meat. So he had this great segment, funnel tons of red meat into yourself, get your beer, and get your gun, and the world will be fine. Meaning, and I take that in the CLA model, at the unconscious level, that demographic group gets it, which you said. There's a world crisis, I need to protect myself. So I get more red meat to make me stronger, I get more guns to protect myself, and I get more alcohol because then I'll feel good about it all. So essentially, this is the beginning of the long-term decline. We won't go sustainable. China, India are just as messed up. Business as usual can't solve it, and we're going to have 10, 20 years of the long depression, the big crisis. Even normal people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, President Carter's national security advisor, he says, given that there are 200 million guns in circulation in the U.S., we can anticipate very soon a civil war starting in the U.S. by 2015, 2018. If the stimulus, business as usual, doesn't work out, get ready for very bad times. If that's the case, I would never recommend it, but make sure today, get your meat, get your guns, and get your alcohol. I don't try either one of those 3, so I'll be out of it, but maybe I should invest if you guys do. So, that's a bad joke. Don't that joke. Yeah, it's a stock tip. What's that group? 4X, triple X, something like that. Okay, let's end on the last scenario. This is really, the analysis was the new era. This is not just climate change, financial, or the global security challenge. We also have new possibilities. Digital technologies give us peer-to-peer networks. Genomics increases our possibility for health. Revolutions in brain science points to meditation, other new technologies saving trillions of dollars in the health system, increasing IQ, helping us be happier, that in fact there's other game-changing perspectives. And the Toynbee view is every civilization faces a challenge. Will the creative minority actually solve it? Sorokin is you go too far one way, you come out the other side and do something else. So in fact, all this tells us is National governance did not work. We need real global governance. None of these crises any one nation can solve. To stop military expenditure, we need a real United Nations insurance scheme, where the UN says, okay, we know you're afraid of your neighbor, we'll actually set up an insurance scheme. A real spiritual jump, people actually practice and see things differently, end of patriarchy, real gender inclusion, and the move from the view that God has given reality, reality is given by the forefathers, to reality is invented by human beings. So this is a dramatic shift, nation state to global, materialistic to spiritual, male to gender, weight of the past to invention of the future, the industrial model of economy to a green model of economy, global corporatism to how do you create a whole range of global cooperatives. The Mondragon, there's many theories around it, they also do very well. So this gives a possibility, yes, things would get bad, but we have the spiritual ability, the social technologies, the physical technologies, understanding of history to actually do something else. So given these 5 scenarios, in fact, we can make different decisions. The purpose of the scenarios is to, one, open up the future, but also if these are the possible futures, what can we do differently today? Which is your preferred scenario? Where do you see it going? Now, in terms of futures thinking, just some pointers we'll talk more about tomorrow. As you think about the scenarios, what you decide to do, in fact, you create. The future is still open. We're in the process of creating it. Economic foresight isn't about saying what will happen. It's about, given the analysis, what different decisions can we make. The thing I've learned from Jung is what we reject also comes back. So this is your point about integration. How do you bring different perspectives together? And finally, I do think few of you will ask, well, what do I believe? I'm in the view that this is a systemic change. It's the end of a long cycle. Whether we like this part or don't like this part, a new era is going to start from this. Thank you very much.